yay, oh yay, oh yay.
How does a landmark Supreme Court ruling begin? In this case, routinely. In 1979, two women met at church and became fast friends. Julia McMahon and Marianne McNulty enjoyed each other's company at church and on other social outings with their husbands. Julia was an entrepreneur. She and her husband owned two funeral homes in Yonkers, New York. Marianne, a stockbroker with Shearson American Express. 2 years into the friendship, Julia invested her personal money and employee profit-sharing plan with Marianne.
Why we work with friends.
Oh gosh, right.
The McMahons lost the modern-day equivalent of over $1 million. Friends became fierce foes. Julia sued Shearson American Express, taking on the powerful influences of Wall Street.
When I say Wall Street, I'm referring to the vast network of financial institutions all across the United States who, through their advertising, reflect that they have the best interests of the clients at heart, and then who have rigged the game and handcuffed the investors to have a fair fight to bring them to justice.
Research indicates investors are trusting, wanting to believe the commercial image created by Wall Street's myth machine of lavish but caring brokerage firms that share the prosperity by putting investors first. Julia seemed to feel a trust and kinship with Marianne and Shearson as she signed the standard brokerage firm legal forms of the early 1980s. Buried in the dense pages was a clause, PDAA, Pre-Dispute Arbitration Agreement. Julia had wanted to sue through the traditional court system. Shearson American Express and Wall Street said the PDAA was binding.
Brokerage firms are so afraid of getting hit with big jury verdicts in a court.
8 years after meeting at church, Julia and Marianne met at the Supreme Court. In a 5-4 decision, the court found for Shearson American Express and Marianne McNulty. A signed PDAA made securities arbitration mandatory. The courts were off limits. But the real winner was Wall Street. With all its weapons and power, now it had a bodyguard. Today, its formal name is dispute resolution. 99% of investor dispute cases are required to be heard by a 3-person panel that's paid by fees collected from Wall Street brokerage firms.
Wall Street has had its own judicial system since 1987.
Arbitration by itself is not a terrible thing. It becomes bad and destructive to investors if it is controlled and manipulated by the very broker-dealers it is supposed to regulate.
You would be surprised at the salaries that are paid to some of the top people who run the secretive system. It's pretty lucrative. And then when you consider that the people that are paying these salaries is Wall Street, the very people that are supposed to be regulating these individuals, you realized why it's a fixed system.
And it's stacked in favor of the brokerage industry and against the investor.
It's a corrupt system.
She is a native of California, grew up just 10 miles from where she lives now in Hermosa Beach. Lisa Pola and her husband created a merchandising and design company.
So we started designing all the gift packs for pretty much every liquor company across the states.
After a 20-year marriage, she divorced. She was looking for a fresh start in life and investing.
When I was with Merrill Lynch, my ex-husband pretty much handled it all. I just didn't want to be where my ex-husband was.
A business pleasure trip took her to Las Vegas in February 2012. She attended a Super Bowl party, and she met a stockbroker from Morgan Stanley. We'll call her Samantha.
So she comes up to me and says, "Oh, you must be Lisa, and we have the same birthday."
Brokers are encouraged to network, go to parties, play golf.
Then she started calling me.
It's sad that we have to call far too many stockbrokers stock jockeys. They're not investing clients' money. Instead, they're gambling, they're short-term trading, they're speculating. They're just trying to generate commissions for themselves and the firm.
I thought I could trust her.
An investor could do a background check before hiring a stockbroker. Google broker check. On the website, enter a broker's name and a professional history is provided, but the entire story may not be there.
In the broker check system, one of the biggest problems is something called expungement. With the people who have the complaints, if they settle, they'll expunge the complaint from the broker's record. Well, what we end up with is a lot of stockbrokers in the country who have had a lot of complaints, but it's not on the brokerage check system because it's been erased.
From October 2013 through September 2015, the market was soaring, the S&P up 19%. That's the period of time Lisa gave $500,000 to the Morgan Stanley broker, Samantha.
She never explained what she was doing with my money.
Over the 26-month period, my client, Lisa Pola, lost over $500,000, while at the same time, the brokerage firm and the broker made over $240,000.
How can an investor lose while the brokerage house profits on the same account? It's Wall Street methodology.
Stockbrokers are not compensated on how much money they make their clients. They're compensated on how much money they can make for themselves and the Wall Street brokerage firms. And they do this by generating commissions. And the problem is the products that have the highest risk pay them the highest commissions.
And all of the risk is shifted to the investor.
Everyone should understand that you need to pay attention. I didn't, and when I started paying attention, I was so confused.
The ultimate goal for an investor is to make decisions and work with people that have their best interest morally, ethically, and legally binding to you as an investor. And that's not Wall Street.
A better term for Wall Street is one-way street. One way from the investor's pocket to the brokerage firm coffers.
Of investors who dispute, 86% don't go the distance.
Investors who go through this dispute resolution process are handicapped because it's a stacked, rigged system.
Tracy also says some investors are embarrassed by the monetary loss. Some feel guilty for not stopping it. Some are leery of the system, so they settle,
They require confidentiality agreements for the settlement.
which Wall Street ruthlessly enforces.
Once you settle, you have signed your life away.
Lisa was among the 14% who do not settle. She sued Morgan Stanley for her $500,000 and damages totaling approximately $4 million. But she had a PDAA, and because of 1987 McMahon, Lisa Pola would present her case to Wall Street's dispute resolution in 2018.
In 2002, I wrote a book on this subject. And in that, I had a chapter titled, The Fox Guarding the Hen House. The fox is the people who are running this dispute resolution system, and the hen house is Wall Street and their brokers.
Arbitration's footprint as a dispute alternative traces to the dawn of civilization.
It has deep diplomatic, historical, and even biblical roots.
The good intentions of arbitration and America merged instantly.
There's arbitration that took place even before the birth of the nation.
Securities arbitration was intended as an elective process to protect the investor.
It's a way to get disputes resolved much faster and less expensive than going to court.
But the evolution of arbitration from alternative to PDAA mandatory centered not on objectivity or justice.
It would ensure that industry norms and practices were upheld by New York Stock Exchange arbitrators, even if the practice in question would not have been honored by a court.
Outraged investor advocates say industry norm is code for a Wall Street culture of cutthroat Goliath tactics to crush David investor disputes.
And it doesn't really have to be in your best interest. What you have to come to terms with as an investor is that is the brokerage community, the Wall Street norm by which brokerage companies operate.
After McMahon, when it became virtually mandatory, the customers started complaining about the system, and some of those complaints were valid. There were some flaws in the system.
Whereas in court, both the press and the public are welcome, in Wall Street's dispute resolution system, it's very secretive. No one is even allowed in the hearing room.
Hearings take place in an office building in the region of the dispute. Lisa's was in this building in Los Angeles, inside a conference room. The panel of three sitting at the head of the table, not necessarily cloaked in financial expertise.
The dispute panel isn't hired, rather they're volunteers, and it doesn't take many qualifications to become a panel member. And what happens is the broker-dealers are so numerous and have such strong lobbies that they get all of their friends and buddies to be panel members. And of course, they're sympathetic to the brokerage firms.
On June 4th, 2018, the hearing began. Lisa Pola testified on day one about losing $500,000 during a 26-month period of a bull market, and Morgan Stanley made over $240,000. What intellectual path of financial savvy did the Morgan Stanley lawyers cross-examine with?
They wanted to know what kind of car I drove.
The strange inquiry set up what seemed to be a smear campaign as the panel sat mute.
Their attorney asked me if I drink every day, and I said no.
Victim blaming.
Do you have liquor in your house? I said, well, yes. So, is there any other kind of substance we need to be worried about? I said, no.
Sometimes it's tears that halt interviews concerning traumatic events. Sometimes it's overwhelming frustration.
Which made me feel horrible. He just tried to attack me constantly.
The main issue in Lisa Pola's case was the unauthorized trading that took place in her account. The brokerage firm defense lawyers wanted to talk about everything but that.
And it should be the goal that every investor understand the basics, things like modern portfolio theory,
No,
efficient market theory,
no.
the three-factor model.
I'm at a loss because we never spoke of any of that.
Brokerage firms do not want an educated investor.
Money was getting moved from one account to another daily, this and that, and they couldn't explain it.
We proved that over 75% of the trades made by this broker were unauthorized.
It was a 5-day hearing. The panel returned the verdict in 2 weeks.
Lisa lost her case.
That was the money I had for the rest of my life, which they played with.
Lisa Pola has no recourse for an appeal. In the eyes of Wall Street's private justice system, her case is over. She has heard from the dispute panel, charging her over $7,000 in hearing costs.
When I think about this case, which is so representative of many other cases, they're investing for their American dream. And to see dreams gutted and destroyed is a terrible thing.
My advice is not to just trust somebody, because if you do, they'll lose you quite a bit of money. My advice is to make sure that they educate you and you understand where your money is.
The people who run the only forum for dispute resolution that investors have are the bodyguards of Wall Street. And this cozy relationship has always existed.
The Supreme Court 1987 McMahon ruling making signed PDAAs mandatory stands to this day. The public records of Mary Ann McNulty disclose a 1990 settlement of $700,000. The Supreme Court decision, she writes on BrokerCheck, created significant public attention. The settlement was precipitated in part by a desire to avoid continued public attention. As of 2019, Mrs. McNulty is still a broker, over 40 years now. Her internet page reveals she is Senior Vice President for Morgan Stanley in Purchase, New York. She did not return phone messages. Julia McMahon is now in her late 70s. She and her husband Eugene sold their business in the late 90s and retired to Montauk, New York. Public records show they sought $5 million in dispute resolution but received $700,000. Reached on her cell phone, Julia said, "It's still very upsetting. We try not to think about it. We are very happy now in retirement." Tracy Pride Stoneman and Douglas Schultz continue to expose brokerage fraud. Over 30 years fighting a weaponized Wall Street on behalf of the virtually unarmed investor. Following her dispute setback, Lisa Pola continues to pursue her American dream, bravely telling her story, promoting investor awareness concerning the risks surrounding the one-way street called Wall Street.